Yeah, done with my Oreo.
Okay, good.
Do we really know what happened?
The brother did
The
it.
brother, that's what I thought too.
I mean, that seems like kind of obvious.
Hey, do you want to talk about death?
Yeah. I mean,
Murdery thingy.
What's up?
Hey,
Hey, how you doing?
are you ready
Oh, you
for
ready?
the night of nights? The
What is
night
that?
of nights tonight.
What
That's
is that
High
from?
School Musical.
Oh, that's why I don't know it. Zac Efron playing Ted Bundy next year. I think that's next year. Remember we were talking about that?
Dude, I am so excited.
I know, it's going to be good.
It's gonna be so good.
Welcome to Mystery Murdery Thingy.
Oh yeah, this is Mystery Murdery Thingy. You're listening to a podcast.
I don't know if
This
you...
is not an audio
If you realized you're listening to a podcast, because, you know... I hope you do.
Excuse me.
Because you probably
I just
downloaded
burped.
it.
I'm sorry.
We burp a lot. I burp a lot.
You burp
I
because
burp
you have GERD.
constantly.
GERD.
It's true.
Who are you?
Mario. I'm the one who has GERD. I'm Mario.
I'm Chloe.
Hi, Chloe.
And this is,
What's
we
up?
already said this is Mystery Murdery Thingy.
How you doing?
Girl, hey, girl, how you doing?
How you doing?
How you doing? Can I have your number? Can I have it?
So,
Can I have it?
I'm going to go first.
What's your name, Delicate?
And we're going to kind of do, like, the same kind of thing, but I'm going to do, like, a few different ones, and Chloe's going to do one longer one.
Because we had a misunderstanding and I didn't understand the concept and I messed up.
No, it's fine. I think we just changed it a couple of times.
Yeah, we definitely did.
Yeah, what we landed on...
We are doing mysteries from...
We're doing British murder mysteries.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So I'm, like I said, doing like a few of them, like over many, many years. So I'm doing kind of a little survey of some different cases in British murder mystery history, so to speak.
Murder mystery history.
Yes. But nothing like super famous. Because there's like a billion. Like, you know, my like favorite Wikipedia page, like list of unsolved killings, like the best Wikipedia page ever. It's got like another page it's linked to where it's like just killings that happened in Britain.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
the UK has, like, their own Wikipedia page for all the murder mysteries from there, specifically. Because apparently people get killed in the UK all the time, I guess.
Well, people get killed all the time, everywhere.
True. Maybe people are just more into true crime there? I'm not really sure. But,
Wait, does the U.S. not have one?
Not linked like off of that page specifically.
That's
There's
very
another
interesting.
Wikipedia page that's like list of serial killers by country, and that one definitely has like a tab for the U.S. obviously because the U.S. has like a ton of serial killers, including one that I'm going to talk about in my weird shit in the news today. But we'll get to that at the end. You got to stay to the end. Okay.
Stay until the end.
Okay, so the first one I'm going to do is the murder of Robert Packington.
Okay. All right.
And I'm like going forward in time, right? So this is the morning, cast your mind back, the morning of November 13th, 1536.
Oh, I remember that day.
Of course. 'Twas a Thursday. It was lately raining. So it's Robert Packington. He was a successful exporter of like clothes and materials and such, and had become quite rich at this point. You know, the sort of burgeoning, you know, business class that was developing in England at this time, and he also became a member of Parliament. So a pretty well-known, you know, guy, right? Famous guy. Had a lot of enemies as well, and one of those enemies had someone or themselves shot Robert Packington as he was walking across the street in Cheapside to go to the services at Mercer's Chapel. So he was on his way to church.
So he was going to church.
Yeah. And what's unique about this murder is that they think, historians think, that it was probably the first murder by a gun in London in like all of history.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's their... okay.
That's its like claim to fame.
Okay.
And I'm just going to read a little description of what happened from this book called, I think it's called Acts and Monuments. I guess it was kind of like a yearly like list of things that happened or whatever by this guy named John Fox, who will come back later. So, quote, "And one morning amongst all other, being a great misty morning, such as hath seldom been seen, even as he was crossing the street from his house to the church, he was suddenly murdered with a gun, which of the neighbors was plainly heard, and by a great number of laborers there standing at Soper's Lane end, but the deed doer was never espied nor known."
Espied.
Close quote. Yes, espied.
I like that word.
Yes. People should use old-timey words more, I think. Because I do. That's my...
I was going to say, like you?
in my wheelhouse. Espied. A word that Mario may or may not use in casual conversation. One thing they weren't too good at, though, in the 16th century was, like, spelling. There was no, like, standardized spelling. So they offered a great reward, but it's, like, G-R-E-T-R-E-W-A-R-D-E, which I think is kind of funny.
Grit.
A grit reward was offered.
Well, then, if there's no, like, standard for spelling, then there's no way you can be good at it if there's no standard.
That is very true. That is a good, though, facile point. Look it up. So a great reward was offered for, information leading to an arrest, but the murder was never solved. There was never really more information that came out other than that. Even though, again, it happened, like, in the morning in plain sight of a bunch of people. I don't know. So this killing was seen as part of, kind of in the context of the larger conflict between, of course, Catholics and Protestants, which has plagued the United Kingdom for many, many centuries, all the way up until today, where it's like people are afraid that it's going to all get mixed up again because of this whole Brexit thing, right? And what's going to happen with the border between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. Now that we've actually, like, had peace there for a while. What was the peace accord? It was like 1998 or something. It's been like 20 years. But anyway, at this time, obviously, there was a large amount of conflict going on between the Catholics and Protestants in England. And Robert Packington was very much on the side of the Protestants. He was a frequent and just virulent critic of the Catholic clergy, saying that they were, quote, covetous and cruel, which I'm sure was probably true at the time and probably a lot of other times, because, the Catholic Church has done a lot of fucked up shit.
Well,
done a lot of good stuff too, but especially in the 16th century, obviously, they were doing a lot of fucked up shit.
Things weren't great.
Exactly. Things weren't great, to put it diplomatically. So when he was killed, Robert Packington was seen as kind of like a martyr, right, by the Protestant reformers.
Okay.
And there was just like a lot of many, many theories.
I mean, I guess if you're going to take that role.
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear, what really happened, but that's the
mystery.
That's the mystery, yes, and that's the frame that was kind of put on it afterwards by people who, were friends of his and had, held the same views as him. So there were many theories that, emerged as to who was behind the death. It was kind of understood that it was probably a contract killing, right? The first theory that kind of came out was by this guy named John Bale, who was a Protestant reformer, and he thought that it was a conservative bishop who had ordered the murder. And he kind of came out with that theory in 1545, so several years after the murder actually occurred. And then Edward Hall, a historian or chronicler, as they would say at the time.
A what? Wait, say that one more
A
time.
chronicler.
Okay.
He wrote shit down that happened. Not necessarily in front of him, but, just
it's just
things.
like a super, formal name, or not informal, a very formal name for a guy who writes stuff down. Before
there were historians, there were chroniclers, right? Before there were scientists, there were naturalists. Before there were astronomers, there were astrologers. It's the same thing. It's just like the old-timey version. So this guy, Edward Hall, he also thought that the Catholic clergy was behind it, but nobody specifically. And he came out with that theory in 1548, so a few years later. And then several years later, so now we're talking, about 20 years after the murder occurred, John Fox, the guy who wrote the quote that I read earlier, also a, sort of chronicler, historian, he came out with actually multiple theories that kind of contradicted each other.
Okay.
So it's kind of confusing. So in 1559, he sort of implicated this guy named John Stokesley, who was the former Bishop of London, saying that Stokesley had, quote, paid a priest 60 gold coins to carry out the murder, close quote. Not totally clear where he got that information, just kind of like rumors, And then a few years later, in 1563, John Fox stated that John Incent, the former dean of St. Paul's, made a deathbed confession that he was actually the one behind Robert Packington's murder.
I love a deathbed confession.
So apparently there was a death. So I guess deathbed confession takes precedence over rumor, I suppose.
But sometimes people just say shit just to say shit.
Because who's going to contradict you,
Exactly.
Right? No one's going to argue with the dead guy, hopefully. And then in 1570, he came out with kind of his final theory that it was actually an Italian who had murdered him. Not sure. Maybe he's got something against Italians. I don't know. I'm not Italian. A lot of people think I am. I'm not Italian.
You're very,
ethnically ambiguous.
Yes.
Is the term that
that's
you're
the word.
searching for. Yes, that is the term.
You definitely could be Italian.
I could be, but I'm not. So, there was another suspect that came out, or that was implicated by this guy named Raphael Holinshed, who claimed that a felon hanged at Banbury had not only a deathbed confession, but a gallows confession.
One.
So standing there on the gallows about to be hanged, confessed to Robert Packington's murder, supposedly.
Okay, so we've got two deathbed confessions. Competing
deathbed confessions. One on a bed, the other not in a bed. So no one really knows, right? Will obviously remain a mystery because cold case from the 16th century, not really probably going to get solved.
Yeah, we'll never, ever, ever find out.
Probably never find out.
Also stuff like Jack the Ripper, we'll never know.
Right. But again, we're staying away from like super famous stuff like Jack the Ripper. But whatever happened, Robert Packington was buried in St. Pancras Church on November 16th, 1536. So, almost exactly... I can't do math in my head very well, but, over 500 years ago, right?
What was it, 1536?
No, less than 500 years ago.
Less than 500 years ago.
A little bit less than 500 years ago. So, I can do that math, right? Okay, so that's the...
400 and...
I'll leave you to figure that
82?
out. Sure, why not? So, the next one I'm going to do is the murder of John Henry Blake. So, fast forward to the early 19th century. 250 years later, or so. John Henry Blake, he was born in 1808. He was the youngest son of Lieutenant Colonel John Blake, so a pretty prominent guy. And John Henry Blake, he worked as a bailiff, and then he worked as a land agent for his infant nephew. So, he was essentially like a debt collector, a law enforcer, not a terribly popular guy around town. He's like basically the guy who's willing to go and, crack some heads when somebody's not paid their debts or whatever. It's not like a modern bailiff or a modern law enforcement officer. He's like the town bouncer, basically. And this role as the land agent, so collecting the
debts,
the debts and the what am I trying, the rent or whatever, right? However it worked at that point. He became even less popular when he started doing that for the man who was widely known as the worst landlord in all of Ireland.
Wow.
Because this took place in Ireland.
That's like a pretty big title.
Yes. So amongst all the terrible, terrible landlords in all of Ireland, apparently Hubert de Burgh Canning, the second Marquess of Clanricarde, was the absolute fucking worst. He wasn't even there, right? He was what they called an absentee landlord. And I think, we've all kind of dealt with this at one time or another if you've...
But I'm not exactly sure what that is.
So I'm going to explain it.
Okay.
So, if you've ever rented a house or rented an apartment, you may have run into this situation, right? Where your landlord is not the person who you see and who, like, comes to your place and who you, like, deal with. Your landlord lives in, like, a whole nother city or another country, right?
Oh,
you never see them at all, but they own the place. They're technically your landlord. And then they hire, like, a management company or another guy, as the caretaker.
Be like the middleman.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they collect the rent, and then they send it to that guy or whatever. So it was the same back in the 19th century, right? So while... Hubert was off in London doing whatever God knows what he was doing, I'm not sure, being super fucking rich and British. He had people like John Henry Blake there as his enforcer, including what he was famous for, which was evicting tenants. Essentially, basically, he was Ebenezer Scrooge. I think...
Wait, is that what Scrooge did?
Yeah, he was all totally... You remember? He's like...
No.
I mean,
I thought he owned a bank or something.
No. He was a landlord. He was a property... He ran a property office. My reference, of course, for Ebenezer Scrooge is and always will be The Muppet Christmas Carol, the best version of the Christmas Carol that's ever been or ever will be. Yeah. And if you recall in that, he's talking about how he threw out all of the little orphans on Christmas Eve with their little frostbitten teddy bears. Oh. During the Marley and Marley song, they reference it, and they feel bad because they died and they went to hell, but he still doesn't feel bad. It's only partway through, but he'll get there because he sees his name on the tombstone. I'm telling you the whole story of A Christmas Carol because if you don't know it,
orphans dying of frostbite and going to hell.
No, that's Marley and Marley who died and went to hell.
Oh.
No, the little
I totally
infant,
missed.
Whatever.
I was like, wow, that's pretty dark.
I mean, they may well have died as well. They were standing in the cold, in some dirty London street in the 19th century. I'm sure many of them did die. But yes, a little dark. So anyway.
Moving on.
But this kind of sets the scene, right? That it's that sort of time, right? Not a great time to be poor, especially if you're Irish and your landlord is in London.
Really never a great time to be poor.
True. So when John Henry Blake was also on his way to church, he was actually going to mass at this town called Loughrea nearby. He was getting driven there by his driver, Thady Ruane, when they were attacked by men with guns. John Henry Blake was fatally shot. Thady Ruane was also fatally shot. His wife, John Henry Blake's wife, was not shot. She survived, but she was not able to identify the attackers at all. And no evidence was ever discovered. So there was really not too much that they could, investigate. This, being the early 19th century, there wasn't the forensics really didn't exist. So they never really came to any conclusion as to who did this. But it was very much seen in the context of the Irish Land War, which was not technically a war. It wasn't between two countries. It was more like an agrarian insurgency. So the poor, land working people of Ireland basically committing acts of assassination, of terrorism, as we would cast it today, resistance. Not all of it was violent resistance, but much of it was. And this lasted between 1878 and 1909 approximately.
So that's what this attack was.
Right. So
against the landlords.
This was what could be seen as kind of like an early, part of this Irish land war.
Okay.
Which did eventually lead to major land reforms in Ireland. Like,
was
eventually,
it just a lot of like unfair laws and stuff like that?
Yeah, it was things like getting rid of absentee landlordism.
Okay.
And, having the ability for people to, buy their land after a while. Or, paying, reasonable rents for their land, not getting mistreated. It just very basic reforms that, like, needed to happen, but weren't going to happen. Probably, unless there was this kind of, like, violent resistance. Now, I'm not advocating violent resistance in any context, but in this context, that's what happened. There was violent resistance, and they ended up getting the changes they wanted. So that's history, It's a little difficult to, kind of, like, judge one side or the other without the proper historical context, and I don't really necessarily have it. I have my bullshit internet research. So, but it seems like an interesting, thing. I thought about looking kind of more into the Irish Land War. I'm sure there's kind of more mysteries that came out of that 30-year period as well, of course. Okay, so that was the murder of John Henry Blake. So that one's, like, unsolved? Like, they don't know who did it? These are all completely unsolved, yes. Although the next two, there are more suspects.
Okay.
We're getting more into the modern era now. So the next one I'm going to do is kind of a famous cold case from the town of Peasenhall, Surrey, England. So this is, like, south eastern England, I believe. So now we're 1902. So the beginning of the 20th century now, about 100 years later, and on a dark and stormy night, literally... Dark and stormy night! It was literally a dark and stormy night. This is, like, part of the story. This was May 31st, 1902. Rose Harsent, a servant, was stabbed to death and found the next morning.
Oh, wow.
Brutally. Her throat was slashed, and then she was stabbed to death. And the investigation actually found, it gets worse, that she was actually 6 months pregnant at the time. Oh, God. So the police start to look into this, what happened. Suspicions kind of immediately fall on this guy named William Gardner. So William Gardner, he was allegedly...
The husband!
No. He was allegedly Rose Harsent's secret lover.
Okay.
So you're close. Very, very close. He was husband to a different woman, but we'll get to that. So what William Gardner also was a prominent clergyman. He was trying to work his way kind of up the ranks of the local clergy. He was also the foreman at a local, I think it was some kind of like cabinetry making or tool making or some such thing. But he was like the boss, and he was the father of 6 children. So he was like a well-established, kind of like up-and-coming guy in the community when all of this happened. And rumors that he and Rose had been involved with each other had kind of been circling for a while. There had been this court case in which one of his employees had supposedly overheard him and Rose having a, sort of assignation, if you will,
That's a big word.
Right.
Coitus!
Supposedly, precoital, in the precoital, sort of period. And brought this, kind of charge out into the open once William found out it was him. And there was this whole trial. William Gardner was acquitted. So the elders, which is how this kind of happened, the elders of the Methodist Church said that...
Wait, you can go to, like, trial for adultery?
Well, this is what I'm explaining.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. The elders of the Methodist Church, in that community...
Okay.
They were kind of like who you would go to, right?
Okay.
Just like
okay, got it.
You might go to a rabbinical court or a Sharia court if you're, if you're Muslim or, and it's something that you would kind of take care of in the community, right? Same sort of thing. Except in this instance, it was like the elders, because it was like the Methodists.
Do you think they wore pointy hats and robes?
I don't think so.
Spoke in tongues?
In the episode of, what was it called?
It's just like what it sounds like the elders.
Oh, no, it was more just like, wearing like black and, like the white, kind of like collar things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. They look kind of like bibs.
Yeah, exactly. Which they like just stopped wearing.
Yeah, I heard
like,
about that.
Courts and stuff in England like last year or something.
Yeah.
Like just happened.
And like the wigs too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like they like just stopped wearing all that shit. It's pretty like, come on guys, we stopped that like a long time ago. Anyway, so where am I? Okay, so William Gardner and she, supposedly had been involved with each other. Like I said, there was that whole court case. She was actually taking organ lessons from him. So
in more ways than one, wasn't she?
Right, cranking his organ.
Hey,
hey, she had started helping out with the Sunday school. They were spending a lot of time together. It was just, everybody kind of knew what was going on.
Organ lesson.
Right. And he also lived, like, in sight of the crime scene. So he definitely had motive, right, to cover up the pregnancy and the relationship.
He was in the vicinity.
He had, what do they say? Motive, means, and opportunity, right?
Right.
He had the opportunity. He was right there. And he certainly had the means. He could have, I believe they think that the knife was picked up from within the home, as often happens in murders, right? So the first trial, when he was first tried, because like I said, it was pretty much just him who was implicated at the beginning by the police. It was just like a total sensation, right? Because this is like a small community.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't like London, right? This shit didn't happen all the time. Like it was happening over in, dirty London.
Hey.
It was pretty dirty at this time. So it kind of, rocked the small community. But it ended in a mistrial when the jurors came back 11-1, 11 guilty to 1 innocent.
Wow.
They said they could not come to a unanimous verdict, and therefore it was a hung jury.
12 angry jurors.
Right. They did another trial. This one also ended up with a hung jury. This time it was also 11-1, but it was 11-1 the other way.
Oh, wow.
11 innocent to 1 guilty.
I feel like that's pretty rare.
Yeah, this is a very strange case. And it was also rare and kind of strange because the prosecution, at the end of this, they only did 2 trials. They issued what's called a writ of nolle prosequi, which is not an acquittal. So usually, if you go to trial, right, they find you innocent or guilty, right? You're either, acquitted or you're found guilty and you're sentenced, right? Did not happen in this instance.
It was like in between.
Yeah, nolle prosequi, what that means is unwilling to pursue. Basically, the prosecution didn't think that it was worth pursuing the case anymore. They're not admitting that he was innocent.
Like they've spent too much time or something?
Just, that it wouldn't be worth it to pursue. Which is not that unusual, but apparently this, actually, putting out this writ of nolle prosequi is pretty rare in British legal history, according to what I was reading. So William Gardner lives out the rest of his life. He doesn't die until 1941, and no one else was ever tried for the crime. But there are definitely suspicions. There are a couple of other men that Rose was involved with that people think it could have been one of them
trying to cover up.
Perhaps.
Do we know who the father was?
1902, they didn't have paternity tests, but it was just.
But that doesn't mean okay.
It was assumed that it was William Gardner's, and there was a letter that we're not really sure if it's authentic or not, where some of this is kind of authentic, substantiated. People also think it might have been one of the other members of the local clergy who was had it out for William Gardner, who seemed kind of crazy.
Kind of framed him.
Perhaps. But the most kind of interesting theory, I think, and the one that the BBC documentary that I watched, Julian Fellowes' most mysterious murder. What is it? It's called Julian Fellowes' Most Mysterious Murder, I think. Anyway, that episode, what he came to was that it was probably actually William Gardner's wife who did it. And that the police at the time just weren't at all thinking it might have been a woman. Because, 1902, people weren't really thinking that way, right?
Yeah.
But it kind of makes sense. She
finds out and she's pissed.
Yes. Not only that, but her kind of whole life, her whole, plan for her how her life was supposed to be is coming crashing down because of this girl, right? Her husband, with whom she has 6 kids.
Right,
with whom,
right.
She's built a life. He was in the workhouse when she met him. She was from a better family. She married him against her father's wishes. Of course, William Gardner then became this prominent citizen, good job. He's going to become the clergyman. She's very happy, but it all comes crumbling down. He's having this affair. Obviously she hears about all these rumors, right? Not only that, but she lost a child in infancy right before this happened.
Oh.
And now, Rose Harnett,
they've both got pretty strong motives.
She's just kind of in the way. So
then.
She had a very strong motive. And again, she had the same means and opportunity that William would have had. And what Fellows thinks, that the guy who did the documentary about it, was that she was probably planning on confessing if he had been found guilty.
Oh, okay.
So she was just kind of banking.
She wanted to,
that he would be acquitted. But apparently they lived out the rest of their days. They moved out of Peasnall after all of this mess. Up north somewhere, I think. They opened a little corner shop and apparently just lived out the rest of their lives.
That's sad that wasn't really any justice.
No justice, as is the case for almost all of the things that we talk about. Because, again...
I mean, they're mysteries,
These are the mysteries. Embrace the mystery, right? So the last one I'm going to talk about is the death of Roberto Calvi. So this is... Now we're fast-forwarding to the 1980s. Fast forward about another 80 years. And we're talking about Roberto Calvi. He was a big-time Italian banker. He was the chairman of what was called Banco Ambrosiano, which was a big-time bank in Italy at a certain point. Roberto Calvi was from Milan, and he and the bank had very close ties to the Holy See, the Catholic seat of government, the papal states, where the Pope lives. The Pope is technically the ruler of the papal states, even today. Technically, the Pope is a head of state, as well as being the head of the Catholic Church.
Oh, wow.
Because the Catholic Church, ever since, I suppose, the instantiation by whichever Roman emperor was, that Catholicism was going to be the official religion of Rome, has always kind of been tied into the political, governmental side of things as well.
Right.
So by 1981, though, Banco Ambrosiano and Roberto Calvi were both embroiled in a big financial scandal. They were accused, and eventually it was found by the authorities that they had illegally exported money from Italy without paying the proper export tax or whatever. So at this point, Roberto Calvi was given a 4-year suspended sentence. He was briefly jailed, during which time he actually attempted suicide. So this is how much, again, his life just coming crashing down, right? Going from being a big-time banker, being the chairman of a bank, to then being in prison. It's got to be pretty jarring, right? So he was, though, released on bail. He kept his position at the bank, but things continued.
Oh, wow. They let him keep his job?
They initially let him keep his job, because nothing, I guess, had been, the court case hadn't actually occurred at that point. But things continued to deteriorate. So by the next year, by June of 1982, Banco Ambrosiano was collapsing. It was basically done as a bank. It was also, interestingly, owned 10% of it was owned by the Vatican Bank. And the Vatican Bank actually ended up, I think, paying out its debts once it got, liquidated and everything. So there's all these, kind of weird connections to, the Vatican. And the Vatican Bank, I don't if you know anything about it, it's had its own, lots of scandals. And, there's one of the things that the new pope was supposed to, fix was this
corruption
weird
inside
stuff
the
with
bank.
the bank,
Okay.
and the corruption and stuff. So anyway, on June 10th of 1982, Roberto Calvi was found missing from his apartment in Rome, and it was learned eventually that he had actually fled the country on a false passport in the name of Giano Roberto Calvini. So he was, basically skipping town. Not facing up to the music. He went first to Venice, and then...
So this happened while he was out on bail?
This is after that court case had already happened. He was given a 4-year suspended sentence from that initial charge.
Got it.
But things had gotten even worse since then, and he knew that more was coming. He was going to go back to jail. There was way more to what was going on at Banco Ambrosiano than just not paying the export taxes, right?
Oh, okay.
And we'll kind of get into some of that stuff when I get to the theories of why he was killed. So
this goes deep.
yes, it kind of keeps unraveling. So Roberto Calvi, he first went to Venice, then he went to Zurich, and then immediately to London, where at 7:30 a.m. on Friday, June 18th, 1982, a postal clerk crossing the Blackfriar Bridge found Calvi's body hanging from the scaffolding under the bridge. Yeah. So
that's gruesome.
Pretty grisly, gruesome sight for this postal clerk to come upon. Weirdly, his clothing had been stuffed with bricks in all of his pockets, and he was found with $15,000 worth of cash on him in three different currencies.
Oh.
So very kind of strange. The day before Calvi died, he had been stripped of his post at the Banco Ambrosiano, so he eventually had been fired. And his 55-year-old private secretary, Graziella Croscher, actually jumped to her death.
Oh my gosh.
At the bank's headquarters from the 5th floor and died.
Oh my God.
And her death was ruled a suicide. And initially, so was Calvi's. The coroner in the UK actually returned there were two different inquests that occurred. The first one was in July of 1982, where his death was ruled a suicide. His family, the Calvi family, was not at all. They had no faith in that. They were not convinced.
Right.
At no point during this will they be convinced that he was not
found
murdered.
on a scaffold?
He was found hanging from a scaffolding.
Pretty high in the air?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
So the Calvi family, hired a private investigator, George Carman, to look into it. And a second inquest was done in July of 1983. And it recorded what's called an open verdict, which means that the coroner was unable to determine the cause of death. Not saying it was suicide, not saying it was homicide, not saying it was misadventure, whatever. Just, we don't know. So that's where we stood at, that point in July 1983. Obviously, like I said, the family believed throughout all of this that he had been murdered. So fast forward to 1991, so 8 years later, the Calvi family still working on this. Like so many of these families of victims, they are just tireless and inspiring in their pursuit of the truth and justice, right? It's always just like so. If you can take anything good out of a tragedy, it's like the tenacity of the victims' families and victims,
who
to like stand up for their own rights and to stand up for justice. They like, if you don't do it, it will not get done. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it works. So they hired in 1991 a New York-based investigator, Kroll Associates. So a team of investigators, really. And they do a 2-year investigation. And what they find is that forensic examination definitively proved that he was murdered and did not commit suicide. Now,
I was gonna say,
we know that...
I was just going to say, like, the bricks... Oh, okay.
Hey, what's up?
Oh, those are good.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Is that for us? Is someone coming to pick us up? Are we going to a party? We're going to a party later.
We are going to a party later.
Friendsgiving.
We are going to
I don't know if y'all could hear that. There was some, like, beeping outside.
I feel like that definitely is going to be heard.
Probably, right?
Those are really loud.
I know, right?
But I was going to say, like, the bricks reminded me of, like, to make it look like a suicide. He said he had bricks in his... I feel like that's weird.
Yeah, I do... Honestly, I do not know what the bricks are all about.
Well, it reminded me of Virginia Woolf, right? She stuffed rocks in her pocket.
She walked into the lake.
Exactly. So maybe he was... If it was suicide, he was planning on doing that. Or if the person who murdered him was like, maybe I'll make it look like this. But then he was hanged?
Yeah, but
question mark?
Exactly. That doesn't make sense. Because the body was never going to be weighed down because he was hanging. But anyway, they know definitively that he was murdered, did not commit suicide. They know this because no paint or rust was found on his shoes. So what that indicated was that he had not walked on the scaffolding.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So they know that his body was placed there. They showed this evidence to the police, but unfortunately at that point the London police had no interest in taking up the case again. So Calvi's body was actually exhumed in 1998, so several years later even, and was examined by a German forensic scientist. And there was a report that was published in, I believe it was October of 2002. So Calvi's neck was also found by this German forensic scientist to not have the tail signs of hanging. So apparently he wasn't actually killed by hanging at all. He was only hanged rather after he was dead. And that Calvi himself had not touched the bricks that were found in his pockets. So again, just more indications that it was murder. Yeah, I just don't get that. And now we're getting to the issue of how high he was up there.
Okay.
So it was also found, they figured out that at high tide, that one could actually be standing on a boat and tie a body up just standing on a boat at high tide. But then the body was found at low tide. That's why it seemed like it was way up there. Okay. Exactly. So they kind of figured that part of it out as well. So finally, in September of 2003, the City of London Police agreed to reopen the investigation. We're now, what is this, 31 years later. They finally say, okay, we'll look into it as a murder. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So what the police found was that Calvi had stayed in a flat in Chelsea Cloisters nearby in London right before he died. And that this guy, Sergio Vaccari, who was a small-time drug dealer with some ties to the Italian mafia, had stayed in the same flat at the same time. And Sergio Vaccari was also found dead. Now, it said on the Wikipedia page 3 months later. I don't know if that meant 3 months after the police found this out, like in 2003, or 3 months later. After Calvi died back in 1983. I'm not sure. But either way, Sergio Vaccari was also found dead, also with bricks in his pockets. Not only that, he was also found with a list of the names of a member of a secret illegal Masonic society that Calvi was also a part of.
Yo, that's dark.
Called the Blackfriars.
Okay.
But apparently that's just a coincidence that he was found under Blackfriar Bridge. There was not apparently anything to that specifically. So now we'll get to the suspects. So the first suspect is Francesco Di Carlo. He was a mafioso who allegedly killed Calvi because Calvi had lost a lot of the mob's money when Banco Ambrosiano had gone belly up, right? So kind of the idea here is what eventually comes out is that Calvi had been involved with laundering money for the mafia, and some of that money apparently had been lost to the debtors in the liquidation of Banco Ambrosiano. So obviously,
somebody's got to die. So
Roberto Calvi sleeps with fishes or whatever, or hangs with bricks in his pockets.
Pushing up daisies.
Is that a mafia saying? Hangs with bricks in his pockets?
No.
That I don't know about?
Yeah.
I'm not from Sicily. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not Italian. I already said that.
Sleeping with the fishes.
Right.
He's pushing up daisies.
You remember we watched The Godfather.
We did watch The Godfather.
Don't forget the cannolis. So, allegedly...
That sounds great.
I know, right? Allegedly, Di Carlo had been ordered to carry out the killing by two mafia bosses, Giuseppe Callo and Licio Gelli. So in July of 1996, Di Carlo basically agrees to turn state's evidence, agrees to give, his testimony to the prosecutors, and he implicates Callo and two other Italians. There are a number of different Italian mafiosos who were supposedly involved. I'm not going to get into all of them. There's like 7 of them. So these people were indicted by the Italian authorities at that point in 2003. And I've got a quote here from the Wikipedia. So, quote, in July 2003, the Italian prosecutors concluded that the mafia acted not only in its own interests, but also to ensure that Calvi could not blackmail politico-institutional figures and representatives of Freemasonry, the P2 Lodge. So, just parenthetically, that's the secret Masonic society that he was involved in. So, to get back to the quote, and the Institute of Religious Works, with whom he had invested substantial sums of money, some of it from Cosa Nostra and Italian public corporations, close quote. So what that's saying is basically he lost a lot of powerful people's money who were not very happy about it.
Yeah.
Therefore, he had to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just for it all not to come out. Obviously, that didn't really work out because it did come out, but I guess not until 30 years later, so it kind of did work.
So it kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't know, Cosa Nostra is just another name for the Italian mafia. This thing of ours is what that actually literally means. So in 2005, police bring charges on the theory that Calvi, again, was killed to cover up his involvement in the mafia-linked money laundering, but all of the trials and subsequent appeals ended up with all of them being acquitted for lack of sufficient evidence.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's not much to go off of except for, I mean, it's very speculative.
Yeah, exactly. So all of the Italian judges that heard the case basically said, there's just not enough evidence here, and we, have to acquit if the glove don't fit, so to speak.
Okay, OJ.
Right? So the appeals actually continued through 2011.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it went on for like a long time. But like I said, it came to naught. So that was the killing of Roberto Calvi in London. So those were my 4 mysteries for this week.
Yay.
Those
were all there. All of them had some kind of strange element to them.
Exactly. I felt like there was kind of a thread between them. But I also thought it was, just interesting, to see kind of different murder mysteries throughout the centuries, in England. And my sources, of course, Wikipedia.
Yep.
That was
Everyone donate.
Right.
It's that time of year they're asking for donations.
Give to Wikipedia if you can.
Just give your $3.
And then give us $1.
And then give us $1.
Go to patreon.com/mystery murder thingy. So the Robert Packington page, the John Henry Blake page, the Land War page, the Roberto Calvi page, a few others. Also a little snippet from a book called Ireland Since the Union, Sketches of Irish History from 1798 to 1886 by Justin Huntley McCarthy. And then also that episode of Julian Fellowes' Most Mysterious Murders.
BBC?
Which is from the BBC. It was really good. I want to watch some more of those.
BBC
he was
always
pretty
coming
entertaining.
clutch.
I love the BBC.
Okay, do I have a story for you?
Can we take just a little break?
Yes.
Okay.
Glasses off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm gonna talk about my sources first.
Okay.
So I got the audiobook by Thomas Harding called Blood on the Page, A Murder, a Secret Trial, and a Search for the Truth.
Ooh.
And I did 2 different articles.
You can't handle the truth. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall.
What's that from?
A Few Good Men.
I've never seen that.
Oh, they're doing it at Community Players soon. I wonder if that scene is in there. Probably.
Okay, and then I got 2 different articles from The Guardian by Duncan Campbell and Richard Norton Taylor. So...
And you ended up listening to, like, most of the audiobook, right?
Yes, almost all of it.
Okay, cool.
So, let's talk about the very mysterious murder of Allan Chappelow. So, Allan Chappelow, which I wrote down as many times as I could because it's a fun name, Chappelow, was born August 20th, 1919.
Reminds me of chaparral.
What does that mean? Is that a name?
No, it's I believe an occupation. It's like a cowboy. It's what
Cowboy.
It's what the Spurs were called before they were called the Spurs.
This town ain't big enough for the 2 of us.
You better get out of Dodge.
Okay, so he was born August 20th, 1919 in Copenhagen, Denmark. He was an award-winning writer and photographer, and he actually specialized in writings about the playwright George Bernard Shaw, and I think he wrote 2 books about him and was working on a 3rd one. He was a photographer. He focused on portraits of artists, musicians, philosophers, literary figures, people along those lines. He was a conscientious objector during World War II and worked on a farm in Hampshire. And what's very interesting about this case is the house that Chappelow lived in, and also where he was found dead. He lived in the same house since he was a teenager for 64 years in Hampstead, a village in North London. His house was valued. Okay, so after he died, it was put on the market and it's set to be refurbished. It was valued at £4.1 million. And Chappelow was also a secret millionaire. So the neighbors described Chappelow as a very weird dude.
Okay.
He was eccentric and he was a recluse for at least the past 15 years before he died. He was very private. He didn't usually leave his house.
Sort of an agoraphobe.
Yes. And he was, like I said, he was working on a new manuscript about George Bernard Shaw. Let's talk about the discovery of his body. So, a little before noon, June 12th, 2006, 2 police officers, Mike Cull and Sam Azulos, received a call and were dispatched to 9 Downshire Hill, where 86-year-old Allan Chappelow lived. So what prompted this call was that his credit card had been used fraudulently, and a large sum of money was taken from his account. The bank tried to contact him, but they couldn't. And this is, I think at this point, it was like the 2nd or 3rd time it happened. So they issued a welfare check on the house, and especially after they couldn't contact him. So when the officers got there, they met 2 other police officers. The doors were locked. There were no signs of forced entry. And let's talk about this house. So this house had lots of neglect. There was a completely overgrown garden. When they when the police finally broke their way in, there was garbage, debris everywhere. Old newspapers, plastic bags, bottles, fragments of wood, etc. There were loose electricity cables like hanging from the ceiling. And at this point, they're worried. They can't find him. The room at the end of the hallway was also locked. Detective Sergeant Nick Giles was called, and he came back with a steel battering ram they called the Enforcer. It took 5 to 6 attempts before the lock broke. There was junk and dust everywhere, piles of it. It looked as though the owner never threw anything away, and the place reeked. Quote, every surface and area was covered with dust. Everything had a gray look to it, end quote. One of the officers later recalled. None of the lights worked. The kitchen seemed as though it had been used in months. The bathroom on the second floor was filled with books, including filled with in the sink, in the bath, in the toilet even. The main bedroom was filled with old clothes. A blue sleeping bag was found. The officers searched the house for 2 hours and they didn't find a body or anything. So at that point, they decided to look for evidence that might point to where Allan Chappelow might be if he's not in his house. So they found papers documenting a flight to the USA scheduled to leave March 26th and then returning May 1st. And May 1st was 6 weeks before this search happened. The search happened in June 12th. So May 1st was when he came back from his trip. They found a credit card, a British passport, and both of those were in Chappellow's name. So what they did was they filed a low-risk missing persons report. They also talked to the neighbors. A neighbor named Pamela Listle, she was very close to Chappelow. She confirmed that he did, in fact, return from his trip, but she hadn't seen him in a few weeks. And she said that he would have told her if he was going on vacation again. And other neighbors said it doesn't make sense that he would go anywhere. Like, he's in the house. Mm-hmm. So the next day, the bank reported another suspicious use of his card. So authorities went back and searched the house again, this time more thoroughly. Again, there was no body found. Next day, June 14th, Detective Sergeant Nick Giles takes over the search. And like I said, the neighbors were saying it's highly unlikely that Chappellow's would be anywhere else but his house. Mm-hmm. So they brought in the dogs. Let's talk about
corpse sniffing dogs.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about a German Shepherd named Lacey. Okay. Lacey is a very good girl. She approached the room to the right of the stairs, which was filled so high with stacks of papers that you couldn't get in. She lets out a specific low bark and she starts digging. She starts digging at papers and piles and everything. And they're like, oh, something's here. Something's here. Now, at this point, it could be anything. It could be like an animal that snuck into the house. It could be anything because this house is a total mess.
Right.
At this point, the Northwest London's homicide unit was called, and the officer in charge, Pete Lansdowne, took over. Pete Lansdowne said to Thomas Harding, the author, that this was, quote, one of the best whodunits he's ever seen, end quote. It took about 5 to 6 hours for them to clear enough piles of paper to eventually uncover just a leg. And because they had to take photographs of everything, they had to analyze it and for human contact, like fingerprints, blood, hair, stuff like that. Eventually, after digging through 5 feet of paper, they fully uncovered the body. Lying face down in the fetal position was Allan Chappelow, arms bent beneath him. There was a trail of blood spray around his head. Extensive neck and head injuries, including the jaw and facial bones and cheekbones. The back of the skull had been crushed, and there were extensive fractures to the neck, which suggested strangulation. He had numerous broken ribs. His upper body and his sweater had bits of congealed wax on it, and his clothes and skin had burn marks, which begs the question, was he tortured?
Yeah, it sounds like a really brutal murder.
It was very brutal. There was a minimum of 5 heavy blows, probably struck with an object, as opposed to being like stomped or punched. And that
sounds like he was killed by someone he knew.
That was the cause of death.
That was the approximate cause of death they found, yeah.
Let's get into the investigation. So they've got a few pieces of evidence. 6 weeks earlier, the day after coming back from his trip from the U.S., Allan visited the police station to report that his mail was being stolen. So while he was away for those 5 weeks, his neighbor had been putting his mail items through his letterbox, like a little slot in the door.
Right.
So when he got back, he found that his door had been forced open and that there was no mail, at all. So after 3 days of searching, Chappellow's phone, another piece of evidence, was never found. It was likely stolen. And we later find out that this is true. It was stolen. The police called the service provider, and they were told that his phone had been used numerous times in the past few weeks. So let's talk about the postman. Nicholas Solman, the postman responsible for delivering mail to Chappellow's home, filed a police report detailing about how about 5 weeks ago, he was unable to deliver Chappellow's mail because there were branches and debris blocking the letterbox, blocking the door. So he goes back, he returns the mail to the sorter, and then about 45 minutes later, he was approached by a man who asked if he delivered the mail. Did you deliver the mail to 9 Downshire Hill? Solomon said no. The man asked if he still had the mail. Solomon said that it was back at the sorting office. The man said that he was the uncle of the person who lived there at 9 Downshire Hill and that he'd clear the branches for him. He'd clear the path for him.
Just want to be helpful, you know? Yeah.
Just trying to help out
I'm
a
not the
little bit.
killer.
The
You know, if that's what you're thinking. I just want to be helpful.
The next day...
Isn't that weird how, like, sometimes the murderer will, like, stick around and, like, talk to the police or, like, become friends
they
with
want
the
to, like,
police
see their
and, like,
work.
But they'll, like, try to help them, like...
Which is weird,
catch
right?
themselves in a weird way.
Yeah.
It's, like, those weird killers who, like... You know, like, a lot of times it's, like, nurses.
Yeah.
Where they'll like, they'll put someone in grievous danger so they can save them. So they can, like,
it's
be the
definitely
hero.
An ego thing.
It's very
For
strange.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a nurse that was on trial not too long ago, I think in Canada, who was like that. I think it was a guy.
Wow.
Yeah, but there's been, like, a bunch of them. Anyway, go on.
The next day, the branches were gone, and Solomon noted that this was like not an easy task. This would have taken a long time. That's why he didn't just like, pull them apart. It was like covered. Like this would have taken work, not a few seconds. So he gave a description of the man. The man was a Chinese man, about 50 years old, of average build, a bit stocky. He had scruffy collar-length black hair and was wearing beige clothing. So the first theories that the police had was that maybe the victim had befriended a con man and who he allowed to enter the house, and then violence ensued, killing him. Or it was a burglary gone wrong. Maybe the thief was caught stealing checks and stealing the mail, and violence ensued. So what is also weird about this is that the trial in itself was secret. We'll get into that a little bit later, but a lot of the information was based on interviews from the author, Thomas Harding, who looked into this for 2 years before writing a book on it. So he talked to a neighbor named Nigel Stewart, the next door neighbor. Nigel Stewart was, at the time... Nigel Stewart?
That's a terrible British accent.
Sorry.
I'm not going to try one.
Thank you. Chair of the Hampstead Safe Neighbourhood Scheme.
I'm not going to offend our British listeners.
Which I'm doing. Yeah? So he was the chair of the Hampstead Safe Neighborhood Scheme at the time of the murder, and he knew about numerous incidents of mail theft. So this wasn't the only... Alan wasn't the only person who was getting his mail stolen.
Mail thievery.
Mail theft, garbage theft, stuff like that. There's lots of identity fraud going on.
I see.
So these things...
You said this was 2006, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
So these things were still happening.
Sure.
He passed along the info to the police, but he was never interviewed. He never had a statement taken, nothing. That begs the question, was Alan's murder part of a wider spate of thefts?
I have a question.
What's up?
Was his killing part of a wider spate of deaths?
God damn it. I was like really ready for like an actual question.
Nope.
So investigators began trying to figure out who was using Chappellow's bank account because that...
Wait, but were there other murders that were connected to it, or
No.
Okay.
The fraud was the thing that led them to Chappelow in the first place. So they went back to that.
So they started looking at the records of the fraudulent purchases, so forth.
Right. So they found that an application was made to the bank on May 26th to request online access to the account, which was weird because Chappelow didn't use the internet.
Of course.
He was an 86-year-old dude. He only had like a cell phone and that he barely used anyway.
Right.
So the online activation code was used June 1st to access the account and was traced back to an internet lounge on Charing Cross Road. And about an hour later, a call was made to the bank. The caller said that he wanted to withdraw money, but he had forgotten his PIN number. So after failing to answer the security questions, the bankers were like, nah, dude, no.
Right.
The account was blocked, and a new PIN number was sent to Chappellow's home address. They don't know. They don't know.
I know. But still, we know.
We know. A few days later, the account was again accessed by someone using this new PIN.
Of course.
At this point, now that this person had the new PIN number, money was being transferred between Chappellow's various bank accounts. One time it was £20,000, another time it was £10,000. June 13th, this was the day this is the second day of the searching Chappellow's house. His PIN number was changed at an ATM, and there was money withdrawn. His credit card was used again that day at an Indian restaurant called the Curry Paradise. And investigators Peter Devlin and Stuart O'Brien interviewed the owner of the head waiter of that restaurant. Like, hey, tell me about the person who was using this card.
Right.
So the owner said that an Oriental-looking couple had dinner, and when they paid... their credit card was declined. Whoopsies here. Okay. Their credit card was declined. So the customer was like, oh, give me a second. He called the bank. He called himself Allan, said, hey, what's up? I'm Allan. The bank refused to unblock the card. So what happened was the man left his phone with the restaurant as like a deposit and was like, yo, I'll be back in a few minutes to pay this bill. An hour later, there was a couple. So the female customer came back. She returned. She paid the bill partly with her credit card and partly in cash. So the man was described as being in his late 40s. He was about 5'10", had graying hair, was Chinese, spoke with an accent. Same description as the postman said.
Right. As the male thief.
Yes. So the owner also said that the man called the bank using a silver flip phone, which does not match the description of Allan's phone. Now, this is important because banks identify that they're talking to the right person by identifying the SIM card.
Right.
And so they only would have even spoken to this person if they thought it was Allan. So the fraudster probably had Allan's SIM card in his phone. Scotland Yard may be able to find a home address attached to the flip phone's IMEI number, which is like a serial number for a phone. So that's what they ended up doing. So Devin called the bank that issued the credit card that belonged to the female customer. So they're still investigating.
Right.
They found that her name was Dong Hui, and she had also bought plane tickets to Zurich, Switzerland that morning.
Oh, shit.
As this was happening, the report came back from Scotland Yard. They now had a name and an address, and they got this information from the phone. 45-year-old Chinese exile Wang Yam, who lived at 13 Denning Road in Hampstead, which is a less than 5-minute walk from Chappellow's house. So investigators received a search warrant and headed to the house. They found that him and his girlfriend, Dong Hui, had moved out. They just missed them. A neighbor informed the police that she had ordered background checks on the rest of the residents after there was all this news of identity theft. Turns out, when she got Wang Yam's background check back, he's known for fraud and material falsehoods. So the landlord also told investigators that Wang Yam's checks kept bouncing every time he tried to pay rent and that he was behind and he owed her over £3,000. So she was forced to evict them.
Uh-huh.
An alert was sent out to airlines to watch out for this guy.
Right.
So in September, 3 months after Chappellow's body had been found, Wang Yam was arrested in Switzerland after being... he was arrested, and then he was extradited back to Britain for trial. He was charged with fraud, theft, and murder. So let's talk about Wang Yam. Between his arrest and the trial, it emerged that Wang Yam had been a member of MI6 and worked in London for a few years. So Wang Yam is a very interesting dude. He was a research assistant in the Chinese Nuclear Weapons Institute from 1984 to 1987. He escaped from China and moved to London and applied for asylum and was granted for asylum in 91. So he was a computer expert. He graduated in computer technology, so it makes sense that MI6 wanted him. He ran his own computer company called Quantum Electronics Corporation in 97, but then it went under 2 years later in 99. A couple years later, he set up another company in 2002 dealing mortgages that also went under. It went bankrupt 2 years later. He also had family ties with China's first communist leaders. His grandfather was third in command to Chairman Mao. Oh. And his father was a Red Army general.
Interesting.
And in the book, they talked a lot about Wang Yam. I could go on about this guy. But they talked about how, he, almost got reported when when Chairman Mao died, he was a kid and he went to school and they were all forced to wear all white and mourn. And he almost got reported because he wasn't crying hard enough.
Jesus.
Yeah. He lived in communist China and was very, very dangerous. In 2005, Wang Yam filed for personal bankruptcy. So dude had financial problems big time.
Right. So there's your motive.
There's your motive. So, like I said before, there was a secret trial. So Wang Yam stood trial at Old Bailey Courthouse in January of 2008. So the basic case against him was based on his use of Chappellow's credit cards and those fraudulent transactions. So investigators, when they were searching the house, also found signs that someone else had recently been in the house. Cigarette butts, footprints, a recently used sleeping bag, and condoms. No DNA, fingerprint, or footprints evidence was linked to Wang to the murder scene, and it remains a mystery as to who had been in the house. So, although he was convicted, there is a lot of doubt about Wang Yam and that he was involved. First of all, there's no connection to Allan Chappelow and Wang Yam besides the fraudulent use. Wang claims that they never met each other, that he's never been to his house, stuff like that.
But he admitted to stealing his identity.
Yes, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So, the Home Secretary at the time, Jackie Smith, signed a PII, a Public Interest Immunity Certificate, which officially made the case, the trial was held, quote, in camera, in private. So journalists were ordered to leave the courtroom in the name of national security. And this is because, I guess, this is what they say, because he was an MI6.
So he could have revealed, state secrets.
Yes.
They didn't want to, take the chance.
Yes.
That he says something in court, you know?
The entire defense was heard behind closed doors without the public or the press. And this is the only murder trial in the UK where the defense was heard in secret.
Very strange.
The government went to great lengths to make sure that Yam's links to MI6 were to remain secret. So Wang Yam maintains his innocence. He does admit to receiving Allan's stolen checks and credit cards, but he said he got them from a Chinese gang and that he had never met Allan and he had never been to his house. The police claim that the male fraudster returned to 9 Downshire Hill after he knew Allan was dead. And Wang brings up this point. He says, if that's true, then why didn't he take the passports and the credit card information that was there in plain sight? In the first trial, there was more than one trial. So in the first trial, the jury could not agree on the murder charge, but they did agree on the fraud and the theft charge. So he was convicted and jailed for 4.5 years. In the second trial, he was convicted of all three. So he was convicted of fraud, theft, and murder. And he was sentenced to life in prison with a recommendation to serve at least 20 years. So this is a quote straight from The Guardian. So Yam actually wrote to The Guardian in 2013 with a letter that stated, quote, "I believe the only way to my freedom is to let the public know what is my defense and what I had done in full picture. No cover-up. I was convicted for murder without even police have evidence that I know the deceased or ever met each other. There is no evidence to link me with the deceased, and there are unknown DNA fingerprint footprints that do not belong to me." And that's true. They don't know who that DNA belongs to.
Yeah, I feel like we've seen, I think the Toyota case, there were also, like, some fingerprints that, like, were never identified.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always strange when there's just, like, forensic evidence that never gets tied to, like, anyone.
It's very
like,
weird, right?
Clearly someone else was involved.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Not to say, like, this person necessarily wasn't involved, but someone else definitely was involved. So like, we don't have the whole picture.
Part of Yam's legal argument was that because his trial had not been reported fully, potential witnesses had not come forward. In January of 2014, The Guardian reported on the case. So not all of his... This was, like, kind of confusing to me, and I was kind of trying to figure it out in full, but some of it was let out to the public, and some of it wasn't.
Okay.
So in January of 2014, The Guardian reported on the case, and that's when 2 witnesses came forward. So a neighbor told The Guardian that one day in 2007, while Yam was in custody, that he heard a rustling on his porch, and when he went out to investigate, quote, "I opened the door to find a man with a knife going through our post. He pointed the knife at me, and I shut the door. He then shouted through the door that he had been watching our house and knew that I had a wife and a baby. He said if I called the police, he would kill me, and he would kill them." He waited in the porch for half an hour. I hid in the house but did not call the police until he had left. The police showed a strange lack of interest and just told me to change all my bank accounts. It is clear to me that there was a violent person or gang operating in the street, and the lack of police interest was very bizarre, end quote. It's been difficult for Wang Yam to show his innocence because of this court order. Like, the public can't voice their opinion and the press can't voice their opinion to kind of push that agenda because no one knows. There's a lot of evidence that was heard in secret that he's not allowed to disclose. And he did try to go for appeal, but all of the appeals were denied.
It's very strange.
It's very weird. So the questions here that remain: did Wang Yam kill Allan Chappelow? And if he did, was the motive money? And if it was money, why Chappelow specifically? That's a big question here. Like, Chappelow was just this random dude who, you know, an old writer, recluse, living in this house. Why him? What kinds of things were heard in the trial? Why was it held in secret? Is there other evidence that we don't know about? Is there some kind of gang out there committing fraud? Was Wang Yam a part of it? Was he in the wrong place at the wrong time? Was he really given, like, this information by some, like, other people? And again, he just got mixed up with the wrong crowd.
Right.
And then again, if Wang's DNA wasn't found in the house, whose was it?
Whose was it?
And that is the very strange case of Allan Chappelow.
It's good, yeah. Lots of mysteries.
Lots of mystery, lots of questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Is it time for weird shit in the news?
Weird shit in the news. Weird. So
Go on.
Mine, it's not, I guess, so much weird shit in the news as it is incredibly horrifying serial killer news in the news. So y'all may have heard about this.
Yes.
I guess in a sense it's been going on for a while, right? But anyway, there's this story that came out yesterday. Well, today, I guess, but yesterday from your perspective, in the Washington Post, titled, "He Claims to Be America's Deadliest Serial Killer. Police Believe Him," by Kyle Swenson. And, okay, so there's this guy named James Little, who claims that he is responsible for over 90 murders between 1970 and 2013.
Absolutely insane.
All over the country. Literally in every region of the country. And this guy, he is, just kind of a drifter, in and out of jail. His entire life had been, variously convicted of, many, many violent crimes, mostly against women, some of which he inexplicably got very short sentences, which is always extremely frustrating to read about or hear about.
Was out and in and killing people each time. I guess
that's what it appears. Yes, that although his record seemed bad at first, when you compare it to perhaps being responsible for 90 murders, turns out it was actually a lot worse than they thought it was. So essentially, this guy Little has been slowly confessing to more and more murders as time goes on, and as DNA evidence has developed, he's been implicated in more and more murders. And like I said, all over the country, in California and Louisiana, in the Midwest, in the Plains, in the East, like all fucking over the place. And there are more of these. Like, there are definitely more that are going to keep coming out. Whether he killed 90 people, who knows? I mean, that might just be exaggeration. He's one of these serial killers who, wants to make their stuff sound worse than it is, I think, in a way, perhaps. He's definitely really into it. He's not doing this because of any, compunction that he feels. He just kind of gets off on, I think, telling people about the stuff that he did at this point, right? And he knows there's no more that they can do to him. He's serving 3 consecutive life sentences right now for 3 murders that he did in LA. And whether or not charges are going to be brought against him for some of these other murders, especially the ones where there's DNA evidence, we don't know. It's always a question, right? Do you want to spend the resources when this guy is already going to be in prison for the rest of his life? On the other hand, those victims were victims too, right? Those victims have families, they have friends who want justice, who want closure, and this may, in some small way, bring that to them, perhaps. So, in that sense, I think it is worth it. I mean, even if you have to spend an extra $1 million, bringing another trial or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever to see justice done, I think.
Especially since it's been so long. Yeah,
for some of these, it's been a long time. And then for some of them, it hasn't been that long. Because apparently he was doing this up until 2013.
Oh, what the fuck?
Yeah, 1970 to 2013. He claims that he was active for 43 years as a serial killer.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, it's real fucked up. And just as a little cherry on top, he apparently told one of the detectives that, quote, God put him on the earth to do what he was doing. So he may be one of these, religious fanatic serial killers, which is a subset of serial killers, where they literally believe that God is telling them to do this. So they're, divinely ordained.
Yeah, there was
as, the angel of death or whatever.
Yeah, I've heard of cases like that.
It's a not too, I think, uncommon psychosis that leads to a lot of heartache and death. So we'll keep an eye on that. But that very well may be the most prolific serial killer in American history. Currently, the verified kills is the most number of verified kills is Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, at 49.
Those ones are
according
verified?
to that article. Yeah,
yo, that's nuts.
But of course, there are others who claim to have killed more, and we may never know. Ted Bundy claims to have killed over 60. We don't really know, but it seems like with this guy, at least, we'll find out about a lot more of them because, again, of the DNA evidence. So
I've got some weird shit.
Cool.
Well, it's not necessarily
like?
weird. It's just kind of funny.
Is it green?
No, it's 4,000 years old.
Is it runny?
Ew.
Oh, 4,000 years old.
This is from the Vintage News, and the title is 4,000-Year-Old Tablet is the World's Oldest Customer Service Complaint. So basically, it's a tablet from ancient Mesopotamia. About 4,000 years ago, Nani, possibly a businessman or artisan, wrote a note to a merchant, E. Nasir, complaining that the copper ingots he had purchased were of inferior quality and that Ir Nasir had treated him badly by not refunding his money.
Nice.
This is what...
People never change. 4,000 fucking years ago, there was a guy who bought a thing who got pissed when it didn't work out the way he wanted it to do it. I fucking love that.
Here's the translation. Quote, how have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money back from me in enemy territory. It's now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Take cognizance that from now on, I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall, from now on, select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt.
Yeah.
And it was
1 star.
It was inscribed in cuneiform, one of the first written languages in the Middle East.
Right. Very interesting. I like that.
An Amazon review.
Right.
Perfect.
The tradition continues 4,000 years later.
So,
Pretty neat.
That's it. That's the podcast.
Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you for listening. Tell all your friends. Tell your friends what you like to listen to, what your favorite podcast is.
Yeah.
Even if we're not your favorite podcast, which is bullshit, just tell them.
Just lie.
Lie.
We encourage lying about anything.
No, we don't.
Oh, we do not. Sometimes I get those mixed up. We do not encourage lying about anything.
As someone who like gets in trouble for telling the truth a lot,
right?
Just like
I'd rather be brutally honest.
I just feel like it's better to get in trouble for like being honest.
Right, exactly.
Which happens to me a lot.
Totally. But yeah, if you're in the U.S., obviously it's that particular time of year in which we celebrate the conquerors, because we are a nation of conquerors, and we enjoy celebrating the deaths of millions of people.
Yeah, because we're awful.
I'm being snarky, but yes, it is Thanksgiving. We certainly are thankful that our forefathers came upon this great land and killed most of the people that lived here before.
Fucked up. It's all so fucked up. Celebrate a successful harvest instead.
Sure, there's got to be some appropriate pagan holiday that we could swap out for.
Celebrate the fact that you can go to Walmart and get yourself a rotisserie turkey.
Celebrate the fact that, the NFC East is still in contention and that, the game between Dallas and the Eagles is going to be an interesting game this year. It's not always the case, but it actually often is the case. Oh, sorry, did I lose you there?
Yeah, I heard NFL and I just zoned out.
The NFL is an integral part of Thanksgiving.
No, yeah, that's very true.
You put the game on, you fall asleep.
My relatives always are watching football on Thanksgiving.
Wake up in the second half, see what's going on.
I, for one, eat and eat and eat, and then I take the best nap of the year.
It is a good day for napping. Good.
That was in capital letters, everybody. The best nap of the year.
So, and if you're not in the U.S., then happy fall harvest.
It might not even be fall. It could be summer.
Or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, as many of our listeners are, happy summer.
I'm so jealous.
Or spring?
Spring. I'd say spring.
And
What's it like?
I hope you're having fun standing upside down.
What's it like having it being 85 degrees on Christmas Day?
If you live somewhere where it's 85 degrees on Christmas Day, email us and tell us what it's like.
I bet it's weird.
mysterymurderythingy@gmail.com.
Yeah. Follow us on Instagram, Mystery Murdery Thingy.
Instagram, all that stuff. All the bullshits, as Henry would say.
All the bullshits.
So,
all right.